11:42 at night, the 47th floor of Vance Steel Tower. Sloan Vance burst out of the service elevator, breath ragged, mascara smudged, her handbag slipping to the floor. Beckett Hollander was guiding a mop across the tile when he saw her, and through the reflection in the corridor window he saw the man stepping out behind her. She crossed in 4 strides and grabbed the front of his gray work shirt. "Kiss me, right now, please." He didn't ask. He pulled her in, one hand cradling her neck, his shoulders angled to block the camera. The footsteps stopped, retreated. She was still trembling against his chest. He kept his mouth near her temple a moment longer than the kiss had needed, eyes on the corridor reflection, then whispered against her hair. "He's gone. Stairwell B, 2 minutes." He bent, picked up her handbag, and pressed it into her hand. He wheeled the mop bucket 2 feet to the left, exactly where it had been before, and walked her toward the unmarked door at the end of the corridor. Stairwell A was closer. He passed it. She noticed but said nothing. Inside Stairwell B, he kept her behind him on the descent, 1 flight at a time, his head tilted to listen at every landing. He moved without sound. She tried to match him and failed. "How long has he been following you?" She stared at the back of his head. He had asked it the way a doctor asks how long the fever has been climbing, as if the chase was a settled fact and only the duration needed answering. "How do you know he was following me?" "Because he stepped wrong twice." She wanted to ask what that meant. Something in the set of his shoulders told her he wouldn't explain. They reached the basement. He guided her through a corridor that smelled of bleach and warm machine oil and into the janitorial locker room. No camera. He flicked on a single overhead bulb, and for the first time she saw him properly. 40, maybe a little past it, hands rough at the knuckles, gray eyes that didn't slide away from hers. He handed her a bottle of water from a small cooler and sat down on a bench 2 meters away, far enough that she could breathe, close enough to be heard. She noticed the distance. She understood it was deliberate. "My name is Sloan Vance. I know who you are, Miss Vance. I clean your floor every Tuesday and Thursday." She drank. Her hands were shaking less now. She set the bottle down on the bench and pressed her palms flat to her knees so they would stop. "He followed me from the parking garage. He got into the elevator after me. I pressed 47. He pressed 47. Did you recognize him?" She shook her head. "Has anyone come to your office in the last month asking about your father's papers? Lawyers you didn't hire. Auditors with no appointment. Anyone. 2. A consultant from a firm I've never heard of, and a man who said he was from the insurer." He nodded once, slowly. He filed it. He stood and pulled a folded gray jacket from a hook on the wall. The collar said Hollander in faded marker. "Wear this. We walk out the loading dock. I drive you home." She caught his sleeve before he could turn away. "Why are you helping me?" He stopped at the door but didn't look back. "Because 3 weeks ago I watched the same man take a photograph of you in the lobby. I logged it." The cold that moved up her spine had nothing to do with the basement air. He had been watching the man who was watching her, and he had been doing it for almost a month. She zipped the janitor's jacket to her chin. He held the door for her and turned out the light. And as they crossed the loading dock toward an old pickup parked beneath a single sodium lamp, she realized she had not asked his first name. The Ford Ranger was 12 years old, the dashboard scarred, where someone had once ripped out the original radio. Beck drove the way he had walked the stairwell, eyes moving in a slow rotation between the mirrors. Sloan sat with her hands flat on her thighs. He did not take her home. He took her to a 1-bedroom apartment in Bloomfield with a brick stoop and a screen door that didn't quite close. Inside, the air smelled faintly of toast and cedar. The living room held a couch, a reading chair, and a low bookshelf. On the second shelf from the bottom, she saw a stack of trade magazines. Vance Steel Holdings, the cover of one read, with her own face beneath the title. A small lamp burned on a side table. Beck moved through the apartment without turning on the overhead lights and pointed her to the kitchen. "My daughter's asleep. The walls are thin." He opened the second drawer below the kitchen counter and lifted out a leather notebook. Black, cracked along the spine. He set it in front of her. "Read." She opened it. The handwriting was small, slanted, the dates in tight columns down the left margin. 6 months of entries, 200 at least. Every line a record of a person, a vehicle, a camera angle, a security rotation, license plates, times. Behaviors. The man in the gray Audi who had circled the block 4 times on a Wednesday in August. The contractor van without a contractor's logo. And there, on a page near the back, an entry that stopped her breathing. R. Vance, 6'3", 7:14 p.m., leaves with K. Marsh. Marsh returns alone, 7:51 p.m. R. Vance car remains in lot. Found by security, 5:22 a.m. She lifted her face slowly. You knew my father died here. He spoke quietly. I was the one who found his car still warm. She had to set the notebook down. Her hand wouldn't stay steady on the page. Who are you? He didn't answer right away. Then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From inside, he drew a credential card, edges softened by years, the photograph an inch younger than the man in front of her. United States Department of State, Diplomatic Security Service, Special Agent Beckett Hollander, issued 2005, expired 2019. She held it under the lamp. You were federal protection. I was, until Manila. He didn't continue. She understood that the silence wasn't refusal. It was a door he hadn't opened in a long time. Why are you here? In this building. As a janitor, your father came to me in May. He didn't know what I'd done before, only that I worked nights and had eyes that stayed open. He asked me, hypothetically, how a man might find out who was stealing from a company without that man finding out he was being looked for. Beck took the credential back and slid it into the wallet. I gave him a name. 2 weeks later, he was dead. What name? Kellen Marsh. She sat down. The chair was harder than she expected. Her father's CFO, her father's friend of 22 years, the man who had stood at the funeral and held her elbow when her knees had gone weak, the man who had told her, in the hallway outside the wake, that she could call him at any hour. Why didn't you go to the police? Because I have a 9-year-old daughter sleeping in the next room, and the man who killed your father has people in 3 departments of the Pittsburgh police. I tried a federal prosecutor in July. The file was killed in intake. The bedroom door opened a crack. A small face appeared at hip height, hair tangled, blue pajamas with white stars. Beck's whole posture changed. Sloane saw him become a different man in less than a second. The girl rubbed her eye and looked at Sloane in her father's janitor jacket. You're the lady from the magazine on Daddy's shelf. Beck turned away toward the sink. Sloane sat very still. He had read about her before any of this. He had known her face for longer than tonight. She slept on the couch. He left a folded blanket on the armrest and did not say goodnight. She watched the streetlight on the ceiling for an hour before her eyes closed. 2 days passed. Sloane didn't call the police. Beck had been right about that. She did something else. She brought Iris Penhallow into her private office at 7 in the morning, locked the door, set both of their phones into the Faraday drawer beneath her desk, and slid it closed. Iris had been her father's executive assistant for 31 years. She had a cardigan in every shade of gray and a posture that hadn't bent in 3 decades. When Sloane said the name Kellen Marsh, Iris began to cry without sound. The tears tracked down lines that had been waiting to hold them. I have been waiting for someone to ask me, she said. For 5 months I have been waiting. She told Sloane about the file. Marsh had brought her an accounting workbook the previous winter and called it too complex to leave on Mr. Vance's desk. He had asked her to simplify it. She had done as he asked. But the night before she handed over the simplified version, she had copied the original to a small thumb drive and slipped it inside an empty oolong tin in the break room. It's still there, Iris said. He never goes near the kitchen. That night, Sloane met Beck at a diner in the Strip District. He had Wren with him. He never left her at home. The girl took the booth seat opposite Sloane and immediately produced a small notebook of her own, the cover scarred with stickers of planets. She drew a constellation across a paper napkin with a careful, blunt pencil. This one's Cassiopeia. Do you know any? Sloane looked. Cygnus. The swan. My mother taught me when I was your age. Wren beamed and tore the napkin in half so Sloane could keep her side of it. She slid it across with both hands as if it was important. Beck watched. He realized halfway through that he was not scanning the diner for exits or angles. He was watching his daughter laugh with an adult who was not him. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened. He wasn't sure it ever had. After Wren went to choose a song from the jukebox, Sloane slid the thumb drive across the formica between two coffee cups. Iris kept the original. He turned it once between his fingers. This is one piece. We need 3 to make Marsh impossible to walk away from. 3 pieces no lawyer can spin into a misunderstanding. The drive, the money flow, and his own voice. How do we get the money flow? There's a server room on 49 where Marsh runs his Shell logistics traffic. The cameras up there are on his private system. They don't talk to the building's main feed. Tuesday is my regular floor rotation. I install a passive logger behind the Ethernet wall plate. It records. It doesn't transmit. I pull it Thursday. You have a daughter, Beck. I'm not asking you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference. She let that sit. Wren came back from the jukebox humming. They walked out into the wet pavement together. As they reached the Ranger, the girl reached up and took Sloane's hand without preamble, the way she might take her father's. Sloane looked down at the small fingers folded around hers. She had no siblings, no nieces. No one had ever taken her hand like that and meant it as nothing more than what it was. Beck saw. He didn't say anything. But that night, after the apartment had gone still and Wren was breathing slow under her star projector, he stood at the front window for a long time, looking at the wet street, hands in his pockets, not moving. Tuesday, 11:17 at night. Beck wheeled the cleaning cart out of the service elevator on the 49th floor and pushed it down the dim corridor. The lights up here ran on motion sensors and switched on in soft bands as he passed. He counted the doors and stopped at the third on the left. The biometric lock had been bypassed by the cleaning contract. Janitorial access cards opened it for fluid removal in the event of a server leak. Marsh hadn't thought of that. Inside, the air was 12 degrees colder than the corridor. 2 rows of black cabinets hummed under blue LEDs. He moved to the second rack, dropped to one knee, and unscrewed the wall plate beside Ethernet port 4. The logger was the size of a stick of gum. He clipped it in line, screwed the plate back on, and stood. 47 seconds. He pushed the cart back to the elevator. The car came. He got in. At the 18th floor it stopped, and a man in a black blazer stepped on. 6'2", Apple Watch on the left wrist, hair cut close. The man glanced at Beck the way a man glances at a chair, then his eyes drifted down and stopped for 3/10 of a second too long on Beck's hands. Beck saw him register it. The way the weight sat, the relaxed shoulders that were not actually relaxed. A trained stance reading a trained stance. Long shift? The man asked. Always is. Beck kept his eyes on the floor numbers. He let his shoulder round forward a 1/4 inch. He became, in the span of a breath, the janitor again. The man got off at 12. As the doors closed, Beck read the badge clipped to his belt. Vex, security consultant. In the basement, Beck sat in the Ford for a full 90 seconds with his hands on the wheel before he started the engine. He counted his pulse down. 74, 68, 62. Sloane was at the apartment when he got back. Wren was already asleep. There was a pot of pasta on the stove, butter and black pepper, the only thing she said she knew how to make. He didn't laugh. He ate 2 helpings. After, they sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open between them. He plugged in the thumb drive and the small device he'd retrieved, and for almost an hour they watched columns of transactions populate, wire after wire. 6 hours of activity. 14 separate transfers to accounts in the Caymans, increasing in size as the night went on. He's moving faster, Sloane said. He knows you're looking. He's getting ready to leave. How long do we have? 2 weeks, maybe less. They sat with it. At some point, she leaned slightly to read the screen, and her shoulder came to rest against his. Neither of them moved. Why did you keep watching after my father died? He took a long breath. Because I owed him an answer he didn't get to hear. Behind them, the hallway floorboard creaked. Wren padded in, hair sleep-flattened on one side, a sheet of drawing paper in her hand. She walked around the table and put it in front of Sloane without explanation. A woman stood between 2 drawn constellations. One was labeled Cygnus. The other, in larger letters, read Cassiopeia for the new lady. Wren went back to bed without waiting for a response. Sloane held the paper in both hands for a long time. Beck watched her hold it. He didn't reach for it. He didn't reach for her. He did the dishes. Thursday, 11 in the morning. Pamela's Diner, Strip District, the booth at the back near the kitchen door. Iris arrived first with 2 cups of black coffee and a manila envelope she would not put on the table. She passed it across only when Sloan sat down. This was on the old security drive. Before Marsh replaced the night system in July, the cameras on the executive floor recorded to a backup that was supposed to be wiped monthly. The wipe was never automated. It was my job. I missed June. Sloan opened the envelope. 3 printed stills. Her father, in his office, after hours. Marsh standing across the desk. In the second image, Marsh was offering him a glass of water. In the third, her father was drinking it. The timestamp on the third image was 7:31 p.m. 12 minutes later, building security would find him slumped over his keyboard. The medical examiner had ruled stroke. There had been no reason to test for toxins. Sloan closed the envelope slowly and slid it into her bag. She knew what she had to do next. Once she did it, she could not undo it. Iris reached across the formica and laid her hand briefly on Sloan's wrist and then drew it back. She brought the envelope back to the office, locked it inside the personal safe behind the print on her wall, and left the building before 3. That evening, she went to Beck's apartment without calling. She had not done that before. She had always called. Wren was at the kitchen table coloring the rings of a planet she had decided was not Saturn. Beck was at the stove, stirring chicken soup. He did not ask why she had come. He took down a third bowl from the cabinet and set it on the counter. They ate at the small table, the 3 of them, and Wren told a long, serious story about a girl in her class who had brought a beetle to school in a peanut butter jar. After, Wren went to take a bath. Sloan stood at the sink and washed. Beck stood beside her and dried. "I'm requesting the exhumation tomorrow." He didn't stop drying. He set the plate down. He picked up the next one. "Once you do that, you can't sleep at home anymore. Not until this ends. I know. You and Iris. You stay here." She turned to look at him. He didn't look back. He kept drying. "Beck, you don't have to do this. I'm not doing it because I have to. I'm doing it because I want to." It was the first time he had said the word want about anything since Manila. He didn't know if she understood that. He thought she might. That night, she slept on the couch again. Sometime past 2, he came out of the back hall with a wool blanket and laid it over her shoulders. She didn't stir. He stood watching her breathe for a moment, longer than he had meant to. When he turned, Wren was at her bedroom door, small and barefoot in the dim hallway light. "Daddy, you should be asleep, Bug." She didn't move. She looked past him at the woman on the couch. "She has the same sad as you." Beck sat down on the floor with his back against the wall. His daughter came over and sat in his lap, and he put his chin on top of her head and didn't trust himself to answer. Monday morning, 8:42. Sloan signed the petition for exhumation in front of a county magistrate. By noon, a paralegal in Marsh's outside law firm had emailed him a courtesy alert. By 2:14, Marsh was in a closed conference room on the 48th floor with the company's chief operating officer and 2 attorneys. He had asked Iris in to take notes. She sat at the end of the table in her gray cardigan and a pair of reading glasses on a beaded chain. She wrote in shorthand. She did not look up. Marsh laid out a plan. The Vance girl had been under enormous strain since her father's death. There were, regrettably, indications of paranoid behavior. A medical file would be assembled. A psychiatrist on retainer would sign. There were photographs already taken of her entering and leaving the apartment of a man on the cleaning staff. The narrative would be clear. A grieving heiress in an inappropriate liaison, judgment compromised, unfit to direct a board vote scheduled for the 14th. The board could be persuaded to install interim leadership. By the time she recovered, the liquidity events would be complete. The chief operating officer asked one question, about timing. Moisted answered him in a calm voice. The 2 attorneys wrote nothing down. Iris wrote every word. At 5:30, she walked out of the building and crossed the street to the coffee shop on the corner. She ordered tea and asked for a back booth. She opened a small laptop, plugged in a small recorder she had been carrying in the inside pocket of her cardigan since June, and began uploading. She sent the audio. She sent her transcription. And she sent something else, a video file. Her phone had been in the breast pocket of the cardigan, lens against a buttonhole she had reopened in 1992. when she still went to crime scenes for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. The footage was poor. The audio was not. Marsh's voice came through clean, with the small click of a pen against a glass tabletop in the background. The Vance girl needs to be done before the 14th. Vex knows. Make it look like she chose it. Sloan and Beck watched the file at 9 in the evening, sitting side by side at the kitchen table. He did not move when it ended. He did not move for a long time. The refrigerator cycled on. He didn't seem to hear it. "This is enough," he said finally. Not Pittsburgh PD. Federal. He had a name. The special agent in charge of the FBI's Pittsburgh field office was a woman named Mariana Cordero. They had stood beside each other on a hot rooftop in Bogota in 2011 for 11 hours waiting for an extraction that did not come on time. She had owed him a call back ever since. He made the call. He spoke for 90 seconds, listened for 30, and hung up. The meeting was set for 6 the next morning at the Federal Building downtown. Sloan sat with her head in her hands. He reached across the table and put his hand on her shoulder. It was the first time he had touched her since the corridor on the 47th floor. He held it there for 4 seconds and then drew his hand back. "We finish this Wednesday." She didn't lift her head. She nodded. 5:47 a.m. The first cold rain of November ticked against the windshield. Beck drove. Sloan sat in the passenger seat with the manila envelope, the thumb drive, the printed transcripts, and Iris's video on a sealed flash drive in her lap. Wren was at the apartment with Iris. The apartment had become a base of operations. There were now 3 coffee mugs in the dish rack and 2 pairs of women's shoes by the front door. On Liberty Avenue, headlights slid up close behind them and held the gap. Beck's eyes flicked to the mirror once and stayed there for half a second. He read the plate. Vex. He didn't accelerate. He took the next right against the arrow on a one-way street, drove 2 blocks, ducked into the underground parking garage of the PNC Tower, and exited through a service drive on the opposite side. The black SUV lost them inside 90 seconds. He drove the remaining 12 blocks at the legal speed limit, the way a man drives when he doesn't want to be remembered. They reached the Federal Building at 6:03. SAC Cordero met them in the lobby in a navy blazer with her hair still wet at the temples. She looked at Beck. She looked at Sloan. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She watched the video without expression. She read the transcript. She paged through the logbook Beck handed her, 6 months of work in his careful, slanted hand. She closed it and looked at him for a long moment. "Holanda, Cordero. All right." She walked them down the hall and made 2 phone calls. Public corruption. Violent crime. By 9 o'clock that morning, warrants were signed for the executive offices of Kellen Marsh and the residence of Dorian Vex. But Marsh moved first. At 9:42, Sloan's phone lit up. Iris. "He's coming. He's bringing someone with him. He's in the lobby." They went up the executive elevator. "They know you're not in your office." Beck stood up so fast his chair rolled into the wall. Cordero was already on the radio. By the time they reached the curb, the Bureau's tactical team was loading 2 black SUVs. 10:21 a.m., Marsh and Vex stepped out of the executive elevator on the 47th floor and walked down the corridor toward the boardroom where Sloan was scheduled to chair the 10:30 meeting. The corridor was empty. The wet floor sign had been removed. They opened the door. Iris was sitting at the long table, alone, cardigan gray, a folder squared in front of her, her hands flat on top of it. She did not stand. She looked at Marsh over the top of her glasses. "She's downstairs." With the police, Marsh understood it in the half-second after she said it. Vex's hand moved toward his blazer. The door behind them opened. Cordero came in first. 6 tactical agents behind her. Body armor, weapons low and ready. Beck came in last. Vex's eyes found him and stayed. 2011. A rooftop in Bogota. A protective detail that had been sold from the inside. They had stood on the same side that day. Only one of them had known he was selling them out. "Holanda, put the hand down, Dorian." For a long second, Vex held it. Then he opened the blazer wide and let it drop. 20 seconds later, both men were on their knees with their hands behind their heads. Iris had not moved. Her hands were still flat on the folder. When Cordero touched her shoulder, she finally exhaled. In the corridor outside, Sloan stood with her back against the wall, looking at the floor. Beck came out of the boardroom and stood next to her without speaking. After a minute, she leaned, just slightly, until her shoulder touched his sleeve. They stood like that until the elevator chimed. Marsh was indicted on 14 counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, murder in the first degree, for Richard Vance, securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, across 3 jurisdictions, witness tampering. The bail hearing took 12 minutes. He was remanded. Vex was indicted separately and held without bail. The Justice Department coordinated with 2 other agencies whose interest in his overseas record went back almost a decade. His attorneys filed 3 motions in the first week. None of them moved. The exhumation came back the following week, a rare plant-derived toxin, undetectable on standard panels, present in the tissue at concentrations, consistent with a single oral dose roughly 12 hours before death. The medical examiner who had originally ruled stroke retired quietly at the end of the month and did not give interviews. The Pittsburgh papers ran the story on every front page for 9 days. Vance Steel stock dropped 22% in a single morning, then climbed back the following week when Sloan appeared at a press conference, standing 1 step behind SAC Cordero, calm and unblinking, and answered every question that was asked. By the close of trading the next Friday, the share price had recovered to within 2 points of where it had been the morning her father died. Iris asked to retire. Sloan gave her a package generous enough that she bought a small brick house in Mount Lebanon 2 streets over from her grandson's school. She planted tulips along the front walk in the first warm week and sent Sloan a photograph of the bulbs in the soil with a note that said only, "Thank you." Beck went back to Knights. He didn't want his name on anything. The Bureau respected the request and recorded him in the file as a civilian informant. He kept the same cart, the same Tuesday and Thursday floor, the same gray jacket. The new building security director, hired the week after Marsh's arrest, came down to the basement on the second night and tried to shake his hand. Beck shook it once and went back to his cart. Wren did not understand the half of it. She understood that her father had stopped standing at the front window in the small hours. For 4 days, Sloan and Beck did not see each other. They both needed to breathe. On the 5th evening, she came to the apartment. She brought a pizza box and a hardcover book of constellation maps that she had found in a used bookstore on Forbes. Wren saw the book first. She put both arms around Sloan's waist and held on for a long time without saying anything. "You came back. I was always going to." Beck stood in the kitchen doorway and watched. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. After Wren went to bed, Sloan took an envelope out of her bag and set it on the kitchen table. He sat down and opened it. A consulting agreement. Executive Security Advisor to Vance Steel Holdings, 6-figure annual retainer. Schedule entirely his to set. A line at the bottom for his signature, and a clause she had asked her counsel to include that allowed him to walk away on 30 days' notice for any reason or for none. He read it twice. He folded it back into the envelope. He set it on the table between them. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. 2 weeks later, a Saturday morning, the first sun in 3 weeks. Sloan pulled up to the apartment in a small dark sedan she had borrowed from the company motor pool and parked at the curb. Wren came out the front door in a coat too big for her, a pair of binoculars slung around her neck. Beck followed with a thermos and a thin paperback tucked under one arm. They drove east toward Frick Park. Wren wanted to see the small observatory the Rangers ran on weekends in Squirrel Hill. Sloan had promised it to her 2 weeks ago in the kitchen, and Wren had been counting the days down on a calendar pinned to the refrigerator door. Sloan drove. Beck took the passenger seat. He didn't realize what he had done until the car was rolling and Wren was already asleep in the back, her cheek against the window. He had not let anyone else drive a car with his daughter inside it since the bombing in Manila. Not once. Not even for a block. Not the older woman across the hall who had offered to take Wren to school in bad weather. Not anyone. At a red light on Forbes Avenue, Sloan looked over at him. "I know what this means to you." "How?" Iris told me. "About Hannah. About why you stopped riding as a passenger. About the year you wouldn't sleep more than 3 hours at a stretch." He didn't answer for several blocks. When he did, his voice was almost too quiet to hear over the heater. "It means more than I know how to say." She didn't push him. She drove. At the observatory, Wren took off ahead, binoculars bouncing against her chest. Sloane and Beck followed, walking slowly along a path strewn with maple leaves the color of rust and apricot. I made a decision about the contract. Beck, I'll do the work. I'm not taking the money. If I take it, every time I come near you, I won't know if I'm there because I want to be or because I'm being paid to be. And I need to know the difference. I need you to know it too. She stopped on the path. The wind moved a single brown leaf across the toe of her shoe. Do you know what you just said? I do. She didn't kiss him. She stepped up beside him so their shoulders touched, and they stood looking down the path to where Wren had her eye against the small telescope and was waving at something only she could see. It was the longest silence the two of them had ever shared, without a reason for it. He felt it the way a man feels a season change, without ceremony, without comment, only the difference in the air. After a while, Wren came running back down the path with both hands cupped around, something she had decided was a discovery. A small ranger followed her at a polite distance. Wren held out her cupped hands to Sloane first. Sloane bent down. The hands opened on a single acorn, the color of dark honey. "It's perfect," Wren said. "Look at it." Sloane looked at it the way an adult looks at the thing a child has chosen to give them and understands, before she says anything, that this is not really about the acorn. It is. She took it carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of her coat. Wren turned and ran back toward the telescope, and Beck watched her go and felt, for the first time in 7 years, something very near to sleep gather behind his eyes in the middle of the day. On the drive home, Wren fell asleep again. Sloane drove in the slow lane. Beck sat with one elbow on the door and watched the hills of Squirrel Hill slide past in the wet October light, and somewhere between Forbes and the bridge over the Monongahela, he understood that he had stopped counting exits. He hadn't counted them since they had left the observatory. He didn't know exactly when he had stopped. 6 weeks later, a Tuesday night, the 47th floor of Vance Steel Tower, the corridor behind the service elevators. The same tile, the same overhead lights dimmed to their late shift glow. The mop bucket was in the same place it had been the first night, exactly where he always left it at the start of his rotation. Sloane stepped out of the elevator alone. Her last meeting of the day had ended 40 minutes ago. She had stayed at her desk until the floor cleared. She had taken her hair down out of the clip she wore in meetings. Beck was at the far end of the hall with his cart. He looked up when the elevator chimed. He had been listening for it. "You're late?" "I meant to be." She walked toward him without hurry. There was no one behind her. There were no cameras she needed to angle away from. Her hands hung loose at her sides. The corridor was lit only by the night mode bulbs in the soffit, the kind of light that made everything the color of warm paper. Somewhere on the floor below, a vacuum hummed and stopped and hummed again. A janitor she did not know was finishing the carpet by the elevator bank. She could hear him whistling. She stopped in front of him. "The first time I asked you to kiss me, I didn't ask because I wanted to. I know. I'm asking now because I want to." He set the mop handle against the wall. He didn't rush. He brought one hand up to the back of her neck the way he had 7 weeks ago, in the same corridor, under the same fluorescent light. But it was an entirely different motion now. There was nothing to block. There was nothing to hide. He kissed her. Slow. No one was coming. No camera mattered. When she lifted her hand to the side of his jaw, he felt the cool of her ring finger against his skin, the absence of any ring there, and he understood she had taken her father's signet off for the first time in 5 months. When they parted, she smiled, small and surprised, and he realized it was the first time he had seen her smile without something standing behind it. "Wren is waiting at the apartment," he said. "She's making pancakes. They're probably burning. Then we should go home." They took stairwell B. She knew the way this time. Halfway down, she slipped her hand into his, the way Wren had once taken hers outside the diner, with no preamble and no apology. In the basement garage, before he opened the passenger door for her, she paused with her hand on the cold roof of the truck. "Do you realize you're the only person I've ever asked to kiss me? Both times." Beck opened the door. "I realized the first time. The garage camera, the only one still pointed at that row of spaces, recorded 2 figures getting into a 12-year-old Ford Ranger. No one was following. No one needed to be. The truck pulled out into the wet street and turned east, toward Bloomfield, toward an apartment where a 9-year-old was waiting at the stove with a pan that was almost certainly burning, and neither of them was in any kind of hurry to get there.